All right. In case you're wondering why we had that slight delay, it's because we wanted to show some video clips of our esteemed guests today. And yes, one clip in particular had to be slightly edited. Not that you guys aren't an adult audience, and this is an adult conversation, but because it is being picked up by video, and I suspect there are probably law enforcement officials or something in the room, we wanted to make sure we kept this safe for work, or as the case may be, for a working weekend. So, without much further ado, well, let me bring out our guests first. First, Keni Styles, who some of you may recognize for whatever reason you might recognize him. Keni is a friend, a great guy, and a tremendous performer in every way that you can define that word. And he came over to us fighting traffic all the way, so we're delighted to have him here. Thank you very much, Keni. And we can adjust that, pull that over. Are these mics hot right now? And then we want to introduce Helie Lee. Heli, come on down. Heli is multi-talented, multi-dimensional, and even sort of multi-gendered, if you want to look at it in a certain way. She is a best-selling author, as well as a documentarian and a performance artist who spent 6 months living as an Asian man. And those of us who have been doing it our lives know how hard that is. So, big round of applause for Heli. Come on. So before we actually sit down and have our conversation, what I wanted to do actually was, like I said, play some clips of their work. And what we have for Heli is a little trailer for her show, Macho Like Me, which shows a little bit of her transformation, as well as some of how her stage show works. And I'm not sure she even knows what this looks like, but I'm intrigued myself.
Bang, bang, my baby shot me down, 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 down.
So I cut my hair, changed my clothes, and lived as a guy.
I'll let the women be the women, and I'll be happily staying as a man.
I'm hoping that after this run here in LA, that we will take Macho Like Me on the road to do colleges and also hit Broadway.
All right. That's pretty quick. But you got little flashes of Heli in there. And of course, Heli will talk more about the process and the product of her work over those 6 months. And we'll talk a little more about what led her to do that. Now, I want to show the abbreviated version of Keni's life as a lucky Asian guy.
Whatever. I went down to the beach and saw Keith like, and I'm like, whatever. This chick comes up to me and she's all like, hey, aren't you that dude? I'm like, yeah, whatever. So later, I'm at the pool hall and this girl comes up and she's all like, and I'm like, United States of whatever. And this is my whatever. And this is my United States of whatever.
Whatever. All right, enough of that. Okay. So now, again, thank you guys so much for joining us.
That was my butt, so thank you.
I thought that was my butt. All right. I'll now sit down and we'll begin this conversation. Thank you. All right. So, first of all, I don't think I could have asked for a better combination of conversationalists for this particular discussion. And we are talking here, the panel's called Sextypes, and sex can be defined in a lot of different ways. We're actually talking really here about gender, and about gender expectations, gender roles, gender perceptions, and how they intersect with who we are as Asian Americans. And so, even though you guys are coming from very different perspectives for that conversation, I thought that what you're bringing to the table and your lenses on this are in some ways actually interestingly similar, just because there's a certain subversion that runs through both of your work, if you will. I want to begin actually, Heli, with you to talk a little bit about yourself, your background, and what it was that ultimately led you to do this documentary.
My mom asks me that all the time, too. Being an Asian American daughter, being the second daughter, middle child, you know, I grew up with a lot of restrictions, a lot of expectations as a daughter, and limitations. My parents are first, you know, immigrants, and I'm an immigrant. I came out here when I was 4. And all the stuff that I write about, my novels, short stories, articles, at the beginning of my career, dealt with being that person and trying to find myself in that role. And I always thought that it would be much better for me had it been if I was born a son, that my life would be much better in my household. You know, I'd never have to do the dishes. I'd always get first servings from my parents. I never have to do chores or things like that. Or, you know, college was an expectation rather than just a surprise. And so all my life I tried to be that perfect daughter crossover into a son. And my first project was called Still Life with Rice. It was a book retracing my family's history back to Korea, where how we came to America, and also discovering I had all these strong women in my family, and somehow I felt less than because I knew these women were strong, and yet when they came to America, they couldn't live up to their full potential, and I always thought that about myself. But through that first book, it led to a second book and a journey back to Asia, where I actually helped rescue 9 members of my family from North Korea. During this rescue mission, which was successful, I had to go to China and Korea multiple times as my family representative to deal with guides, translators, drivers, safe house owners to smuggle my family across the border. My family voted to send me to Asia to be the mediator and to handle this rescue mission. I thought it was because I was the most qualified. I had written this book about my family. I was a go-getter. I was strong and brave. It turned out they voted me because I was the only one not married and without a real job because I was a writer. Had I known this, I would have been pissed off. So I go to Asia. Every time I am there, I'm carrying like $10,000 in U.S. cash, trying to, you know, deal and wheel for my family's life. And yet men would not deal with me because I was a single woman of a certain age. And so I would have to defer to a man to give my cash to a gangster. So it was so troubling, and I thought, my God, I had achieved so much in America, and yet I'm being treated like a woman child. I'm being disrespected, disregarded constantly. So after the rescue mission, I came back to the States, and I thought, just once, I would like to know what it feels like to be a man, an Asian man. And so I thought, well, if I could rescue 9 people from North Korea, why can't I be a man? And I also had read Black Like Me years ago in school. And I thought, if he could become a white man, could become a black man, I could certainly become an Asian man. And so I did the whole thing. I cut my hair, I changed my clothes. I moved out of my home and into another place where I thought nobody would know me, but I actually just moved into Koreatown, and I thought, well, this is terrible because I'm here in Koreatown. I might run into my parents or somebody that knows them, and they might think I'm gay. That's why I'm not married or something like that. The rumors would start circulating. But then I thought Koreatown was a perfect place to experience what it feels like to be on top of the food chain as far as being an Asian male. Well, that's what in my perspective,
You've been watching reality shows a little bit too much, I think.
But what I quickly realized is my journey as a man was not about the Asian man. It was simply about being a man And my experience across the board, I think was pretty true to a lot of male experiences. The greatest lesson that I realized was it is not always better on the other side of the grass, the fence. That what I thought as a strong feminist woman, that men had it so much better, especially Asian men, was not true. And I was completely humbled by that experience. And had it not been for that experience, I don't think I would have ever gotten married or had children or embraced everything that is feminine about me, because I was fighting so hard against the men in my family, the men I was dating, society's injustices against us, me. So finally I let myself off the cross, and I just started to be me.
Yes, after 6 months living on our side of the fence, you're like, oh, I'd rather not. But let's now turn over to Keni, who has been playing an Asian male for a much longer period of time.
What's up? Firstly, what amazing story, Heli. Like I think that's such a to go and do things that no one else does. I mean, our similarities there. Being the only Asian guy in adult movies never used to be a big deal to me. Like I just was another guy until I came to the States. And that's when I really started having to learn the Asian American male peril. Yeah, the situation about mainstream media representation and also like the social stigmas of being an Asian man in America is completely different to how it is in London, in Europe, in everywhere else that I've been.
Now, on that note, I mean, when we first met, actually, I interviewed him because, for a column I was writing for the San Francisco Chronicle, and people had constantly been emailing me to, do a story about Asian men and the plight of Asian men and how Asian men, have like just, it's all sucky for Asian men. And I've resisted it because, frankly, I don't really think that's entirely true myself, right. First of all. And second of all, because I feel like most of the people you talk to who speak to that end up rolling into a different set of cliches or a different set of pre-existing conditions, if you will, around them. And in talking to you, Keni, one of the things that was most refreshing was that you really were coming to this almost with a new set of eyes. And you mentioned you started out your career in Europe, mm-hmm. and the perceptions are different. Tell us a little bit about that.
I mean, professionally, it's like, if you can do the job, you can do the job. And in Europe, that's the merit that you're hired upon. There was never really any of the yellow face stuff or anything really that would revolve around being cast in roles specifically as an Asian man. It was just boy meets girl, you know the rest. So when I came out here, and then I started being presented with different roles, and computer geek, delivery boy, martial arts instructor, the list goes on, it was interesting to me how I'd go about it, because firstly you got to eat and pay your bills, and secondly you got to be honest and like integral to yourself, right? And so I don't subscribe to the stereotypes. No matter how often fans and people contact me and tell me about how it is for them, I feel like it's a lot more about their own perspective on the situation. when I first got to America, that royally upset a lot of Asian men because they were like, well, you know, he's whitewashed. He doesn't really know. He's come from Europe. He does this and this and this and that. But it's all been like more and more excuses to back up the opinion of the social status or whatever it is that they're talking about, what's in their pants, you know, like how to interact with non-Asian girls, for example, you know, that all of those kind of subjects come flying at me daily, daily, and then and it's the whole process of being in America was like a really steep learning curve about the reality of what I at first would just brush off like, what the hell are they talking about? And it's a very real subject because there's people who are really suffering in their lives with outside opinion or external opinion from others, parents, non-Asians,
Both male and female.
both male and female, and but the thing is, the common running theme is it was always about themselves, and the point that I was always trying to find ways to diplomatically say it was the sooner that you drop it, the sooner it doesn't exist.
That's fascinating because I suspect JT's in the room somewhere here, right? That's probably the first lesson he tells people, right? We'll get to questions later. I'm sure there'll be a lot of conversation there. But this actually brings us back to this notion of, you know, being an Asian male and what it means from the outside. And as you lived for 6 months in this role, now obviously you can't take on the plumbing, right? Not without surgery, which would probably have made it much more difficult to be the mother of 3.5-year-old twins. But you could at least approximate a visual identity as an Asian male.
Yes.
And tell us a little more about the process and then what that did in terms of how people reacted to you and interacted with you.
Before I answer that question, let me say that I noticed there was a pecking order of men. You know, the moment I started transitioning, it took me a good couple, it took me about 2-3 months to transition. At first, I sort of passed as a lesbian, then someone who was like a butch, then an it, someone who is sort of like genderless floating around. Then I passed as a gay man or a gay young man, and then I started just passing as a guy. So it was a long journey to get there. And once I got there, I realized there was a pecking order, especially when it came to sex. You know, the top was like the African men, and then you had the white guy, or the Latinos, and then you have like the Caucasian guys, and then I realized I was on the bottom as an Asian man. But I was very hot in the gay world. The gay men loved me. I was like the flavor. And it was interesting, though, and also but then also it was my experience because as a male, I was very slender, and I looked really young. Once I made the transition, I lost 10 years because of my face and my not having facial hair. So I was also experiencing a generational experience. I'm sorry, what was your question? I'm sorry. I have 3.5-year-old twins at home, and I have not slept in 4 years. So thank you for inviting me to have grown-up talk. My breasts hurt, but I am happy to be here. So are we talking about breasts?
No.
No, we're talking about, I'm sorry. Okay.
Yeah,
What's your question?
we'll get to the breasts.
Okay.
But yeah, I think it's actually important to note that this is part of the historical record for them when they're adults to actually look back on this period of your life as their...
But I'm so glad I did it because all my life, when I became a young lady, a woman, I always wanted to have a daughter because I knew I was going to raise her to be the new woman. I was going to raise her to be strong, independent, do not rely on any man. I was going to have her on my own. And then after this experience, I get married and I have twins and one is a boy. I'm like, hell, how am I supposed to raise this young being into the man that he needs to be? Because after going through that experience, I realized he needs a lot of TLC from me and a lot of support and guidance, more than actually I think my daughter needs, to be the kind of man that will survive in society. It'll be easier for her to go through life's journey than it will be for him. So he needs more attention and more grooming and more loving from me. And that was a big realization. And also, you know, I can't be a single mother. He needs a male force in his life. So that was my big lesson as, you know, being a mother of a boy now, which it is all about the penis, I realize too. When you have a boy, it's all about the penis.
Yeah, that's one thing that probably was harder for you to actually to get authentic authentic realness around.
You don't need to have a penis to be well, no, that's not true. You do need one.
Well, now let me turn it back to Keni, because in some ways there's some truth, you know.
Penis?
To that. Yeah. Now that we're talking about penises, no, there's some truth there, but there's also, I think, that essentializes what gender is. And I think one of the things that's interesting about both of your contexts, right, is that there's a lot of play acting that goes on in both. And, you know, both of them involve really kind of complicated and provocative and controversial, as you've discussed, you know, almost caricatures of sexual identity, of sexual orientation, of race, you know. But they play out, and they play out in ways that we don't like talking about. And I think in pornography, they play out in ways that are very overt. And you talk about that pecking order. That is the way that pornography actually, you know, lays out sexual roles. And I want to actually bring it to you, Keni, because when you started working here in the United States, you did have to deal with not just the Asian stereotypes, but also the stereotypes, you know, arguably about the types of work you were doing, you know, who you were working with, and how, honestly, I mean, men in the adult film industry have a very different role, period, from, you know, female performers as well. And I'm kind of curious how being a man in an industry that both exploits but also in some ways privileges female performers over men was different for you.
Well, firstly, I think yeah, that's very true. What you say about the industry and the way it has conducted or portrayed itself over the years, that's a fair comment. But again, I think it comes back down to the fact of how you conduct yourself. Because for example, if you look anywhere about anything to do with Asian and porn, and I'm sure you just put Google in and you put Asian and porn, and a lot of it comes down to stereotyping of Asian females, right? Mm-hmm. Schoolgirls, submissive, tiny, and this and that.
If you just put in Asian, you don't have to put Asian porn.
Right.
All that stuff.
And you know, and whether or not you're going to participate in something that is disrespectful or feeding into any kind of stereotype is your own choice. And I just chose that that's not really for me. But a lot of people do. And I think a lot of the negative aspects of male and female representation in adult movies comes down more to the individual participating in that portrayal, you know.
Are there more Asian porn stars in Europe?
Are
you the only one?
Yeah, I'm the only one, but you know, like people always say, he's the only Asian in porn. Well, not really, because you just got to go to Japan, and you got plenty of Asian guys. representing, right? And it's just not, it's not really a big thing in Europe, like the interracial aspects.
But can I ask you, who are your fans? Are they like Asian men, Asian women? Are they just...
I get a lot of Asian guys, Asian girls, and you know, and white and black and everyone else. I don't really try to not speak to anyone because of their race or anything. So I think people who are interested in me because I'm Asian is a certain fan base, and there's people who are interested in me for other reasons, and that's a different fan base, you know?
When you actually did your movie and started playing it, who were the people coming to your performance? Well, not just your movie, your live performances. Who are the people who are coming and to your shows, and how are you interacting with them? Was it mostly men, mostly women, mostly Asian, mostly non-Asian, and how did they actually receive it differently?
When I first started demoing the show, I invited a lot of, you know, anywhere from high school to like 80-year-olds, and so my audience was very diverse. But I noticed that in the front, the men all sat in the back, and they all sat like this. Like, what is this bitch gonna talk about us? You know, and they were pissed because their wives or their girlfriends dragged them there. And at the end of my show, they were coming up to me and going, "Dude, you totally got it right!" And they were congratulating me because sometimes, you know, because I'm not a guy and I'm looking at the experience through my eyes. I saw things that normally, you know, it's an outside perspective, and so they felt like I got the thing that they were trying to put their finger on for years and couldn't verbalize or even was aware of. And so the men became my biggest cheerleaders because they felt like I was telling their story. And so then they started bringing their mothers and their sisters. It's interesting. And early in my career as a writer, a lot of my audience was high school to young professional Asian Americans. But since I've been out in the business and since my writing has grown as I grow on my journey of life, my audience is very diverse. Sometimes I go and there's no Asians in the audience. So it's interesting, but the men scared me at the beginning, but then I realized they were my biggest fans, and I was telling their story.
I mean, that's interesting because I imagine that, you know, some of the questions you got or the first reactions you got were, you know, it doesn't matter what you wear, what you do, you know, you're never really going to feel what it's like to be an Asian man or a man, period.
Absolutely. Right? But I did make other people believe, which was very important. You know what the key to my passing was? I hit a point, and it was weird because my face started changing. My bone structure was more angular, and I looked like a guy, but something about me wasn't passing. And you know what it was that I needed to change? Does anybody have a clue? What? That too. But it was the fact that I was too expressive. That took me into the gay realm, you know? So the moment I stopped everything, I started to pass as a guy. I stopped talking too much. I put my hands in my pocket. I showed no expression. I didn't move too much. And I passed, and I was like, damn, this was it. This was the key I was looking for. And when people would ask me questions, I'd sort of just grunt and answer. And it was so believable. That's weird, right? But so I just really pulled everything in, and I started passing, and I became more of an observer, and that allowed me to pass. But after doing that for months, I started feeling this internal bubbling where I was about to go insane and explode. Maybe because I'm a female, I'm used to so much more expression physically, emotionally. I touch all the time, I hug all the time, I get that physical contact, I get emotional satisfaction and relief. But I had none of that, and I felt like I was so detached. And for the first time in my life, before that experience, I felt racism, sexism, ageism, cultural chauvinism, politicalism, nationalism. I felt all the isms. But when I was a guy, I could honestly say for myself, I felt oppressed, self-oppressed, because I didn't allow myself to show my emotions. And I believe a lot of guys experience that. Because if I smiled too much, if I laughed a little weird, or a high pitch, or if I moved my wrists around too much, or had a little swagger in my walk, or I decided to wear pink today, people were constantly, the men were constantly, I felt like, trying to, in a very nonverbal way, tell me that I was doing something, like I was crossing the border, so I'd get back into place. And also I was checking myself. Before I went out the door, I checked my masculinity to make sure that I could pass. But as a woman, I never checked my femininity at the door. Is this girly enough today? Am I looking like a female today? Am I gonna have to swagger a little bit more to pass as a woman? But as a man, I always checked myself from head to toe, and that was most difficult.
Keni, I mean, it's really interesting to hear it from that perspective. I mean, on some level, I totally get it. Although I think it's partially educating me in how bad I am at playing a guy, because I've never been very good about being kind of the sort of reined in, quiet, nonverbal type.
I think as an artist too, once I started identifying myself as an artist, a documentary filmmaker, as a guy, I had more liberties, and I was able to be more fluid.
More expressive, yeah.
More expressive, but still there's that fine line. I couldn't cry every day if I wanted to as a male. It looked too sissy, and that word was thrown at me a lot, sissy. And I thought, gosh, I haven't heard that word in so long, but as this person, I'm hearing it a lot.
I cry every day. So, Keni, this is interesting because, so much of this notion of Asian masculinity does kind of cross into and intersect in ways with stereotypes of sexual orientation. I mean, the term sissy, right? The idea that, as we've seen in our literary canon, things like M. Butterfly and so forth, that an Asian man can't ever truly be a man, etc. How does that play out with what you've encountered? Because there are plenty of Asian American and Asian other males in porn who are not who are not in straight porn, who are in gay porn, right?
Right.
And did that actually intersect with how people perceived you?
Well, I mean, yeah. That's the other Asian men in porn are all in the gay side, and straight away. If you are, and there's nothing wrong with gay porn, right? I'm not against gay porn or anything, but I constantly faced the attention of gay producers and coming to the States, by the way. This doesn't happen in Europe, but when I came to the States, you have the companies looking for you to do your first gay thing or this and that, and it's like, it's very simple. If you're gay, you're gay, and if you're not, you're not. And as far as I'm concerned, that's how it goes. If you're going to do it on video, you might as well do it in private. But the presumption that I would be open to it is a indication of the masses' opinions on
It's a market
Asian
demand
male
thing, yeah?
sexuality.
Yeah.
But
I'm sorry.
yeah, go on.
No, I was going to say, I thought if I ever do this again, crossover, I would come back as a gay man. Having spent time in the gay world as a man, I felt so liberated,
Right.
you know, and embraced and chatty, and it felt so good to escape from this male world that I was living into a gay bar and just literally just let my hair down.
Well, you know, I think this is a great break point for us to bring in the audience. I'm sure there are people who are sitting at the edge of their seats, sort of like, you know, want to say something. So let's open this up. I think, do we have wireless microphones in the audience that are passing around? I think we should have 2 more.
Here, why don't you have a loud voice? Does anybody want that?
Well, we want to make sure we get answers on camera too. But all right, so well, let's go to JT. If we can bring in a mic up here.
This one's working.
Okay. You know what? We'll share this one then. All right.
Hey. Actually, this question is for Heli, although props to Keni. We're kind of in similar fields, except I don't put my videos out there. Heli, though, we've kind of beat around the bush about your experience about Asian men and what you're talking about, like your son having to give him more TLC. What specifically did you encounter play acting as an Asian man that made you believe that it was more of a burden or like a struggle, like specifically that you found?
You know, not so much as an Asian man, but as a little boy who is going to be a man someday. You know, the things that I experienced was not being emotionally supported, not telling my son, it's okay to have your feelings, it's okay to be expressive. If you need a hug, ask me. And also to teach my little girl to, you know, respect guys, respect men, and that we are an equal partnership. Well, nothing in life is actually equal, but you know, it's great to cohabitate and need each other and support each other and stop battling. And I was always battling against the sexes. And to realize that we are not the same in many ways and to embrace those differences. But my daughter at 3, she has no problem expressing herself, or hitting her brother, you know, or, you know, challenging him. It's just, for some reason, it's innate in her to challenge him and to knock him down. And he's just so sweet, you know? And at school, they try to make him tougher. Like, oh, he's crying too much, he's a little whiny, he's needy of his mother. I'm like, that's okay. Let him be. He's trying to find himself, and if that, you know, let's embrace that. Let's give him a lot of love, and but don't knock it out of him. Don't kill the sensitivity out of my little boy. And so that's what I'm trying to do.
Next question's up here. Up here.
Hi, I have a question for Heli. I appreciate what you're doing and how you're bringing masculinity under a microscope, so thank you very much for that. One question I do have, though, is whether you had any conversations with folks who identify as queer or trans. I feel like being queer myself, your descriptor felt kind of like Yellowface, but in a queer way when you're talking about performance. And I'm just curious as to whether you had those conversations and what led to your...
You know, I'm sorry if I, you know, sound disrespectful, or I don't mean to be, or, you know, haha about the whole thing. But my greatest support during this experience was my best friend who is gay. And Tom who's in my documentary, really was my coach, my mentor, my support. And once I made the transition, I would have really stayed within the gay world because I felt completely accepted and embraced. But I also, my documentary was about being just a straight man, so I had to cross back over or go into the straight world. But I think I'm putting my foot in my mouth or my heels in my mouth. No, but I did have a lot of contact. Also, I went into gay female bars, but then I realized I had to pull back a little bit because that wasn't what my journey was about. I had to tackle this tiger before I went on a tangent, but they were very present during my experience, and I had a very positive experience from it.
Next question is to your right, over here.
Sorry, Kenny, this one's for Helie too.
Heli, like helicopter.
Helie? Oh, I'm sorry.
No problem.
So I wanted to find out a little bit more about where you learned this pecking order, because I don't really subscribe to that. I mean, I think it's kind of, honestly, bullshit. That, I guess, Africans Americans are more sexual. Is that something that's perceived that you're saying Asian men are putting that on themselves, or that's how we're perceived from, I don't know.
You know, I just noticed it for sexuality-wise, that when I was hanging out and the guys, you know, I hung out with like African Americans, Latinos, and because I am Asian and how they perceived me, I felt desexualized a lot of times. I felt like they were thinking that they were more machismo than me because of what I look like and, you know, my physical shape and my face and stuff.
I guess, would you date yourself? If your male self hit on you in a bar, would you date yourself?
I say this honestly all the time, no.
Because that's the thing, it's not just about being Asian. Within any ethnicity, there is a pecking order within that ethnicity based on your looks.
Yeah, and I was on the lowest part of that pecking order, let me tell you. And so I say that all the time. I would have not dated me as a guy. I was a wimp. I was lost. I started off my journey very cocky because I was loving being a guy. Oh my God, it was like all of a sudden I entered into this whole other world I thought of privilege. And then the longer I did it, I became more introverted, more contained. But this was my experience, and I say that all the time as a writer, that whatever I write about, and I only write nonfiction, and I sort of follow my journey of my evolution, and it's always from my perspective, because it has to be. It may not be the correct perspective, but I'm just telling you what my perspective is. Whether you embrace it or not, that's okay. And thank God I was not representing all Asian men, because it would have been a darn shame.
Yeah, I just want to say that I also really thank you for discussing that, and Keni as well for talking about not just the movies and films that you make, but also breaking boundaries between different interracial groups being together as well. You don't really see that with Asian males and Latino women unless it's like Harold and Kumar or something like that. Or, you know, even Asian men with black women, like those kinds of things people don't really discuss and talk about. And, you know, I'm glad that you're in the position to even open up that dialogue, even as though it's in something that's kind of underground in a way. Adult film is underground, and even though that we have patriarchal and sexualized roles, it sort of has that position as well in terms of being talked about. Because I even feel like people are being very careful in talking about adult film. There's a lot of constraints in talking about our sexuality. So, you know, I really appreciate that. You know, and also to discuss, like, Heli, in that context of patriarchy and men kind of having it worse than women, in the example that you brought with, you know, being macho or not talking about or being a sissy, it's really because it's in the context of being a woman. I mean, you're a sissy because you're acting like a woman. Like, that's the problem to me. And we should, you know, really take great pains to discuss that that's the system that is oppressing women and oppressing men at the same time.
And I was getting
and with the queer issue too, you know, it's really tough because, like, even as though you may be welcome within the queer community, at society at large, people who are queer are getting beat down. LGBT community people are not only getting beat down, they're killing themselves because they're gay. And so I feel like it's hard because, you know, we've had a context of really enjoying ourselves and having a lot of laughs, and I really think that that's great. But at the same time, this is real life and that people have to deal with, and it's not something that people can just put off and on and not face the consequences because of that, living that way. So I just wanted to make that point because it's really been burning inside and bothering me, because I don't know if you really intend that, but that's kind of how it sounds, and
No,
you know,
I
it's
respect
bothering
that.
me.
I
you know?
totally respect that. My experience was a blink. 6.5 months was a blink. And again, I say I'm not representing any group. I am representing what are my experience. there was another woman who is a lesbian. She's a journalist. She was a journalist for the New York Times, and she lived as a guy for about a year. And she did it on and off. She went back home every night, took off her makeup, and then she lived that experience. But our experience were pretty much very emotional journey was pretty much on the mark. We were very, very similar, and so I was surprised by that.
I mean, I think that one thing we have to make clear here is that part of the conversation that we're having here is to provoke exactly these reactions or these conversations. We all know that no one can literally step into these shoes, our shoes, one another's shoes. In many ways, we can't even fully understand what it's like to be other Asian men when we're Asian men, right? Or Asian women when we're Asian women, and so forth. And I think it's really important that we feel open and frank and candid about having exactly this kind of reaction. At the same time, what I think that is really interesting here is it's clear that these aren't clean. None of these are clean. When we talk about stereotypes, when we talk about stereotypical stuff, kind of like when I was saying like this whole issue of the geek stereotype and how when we protest too many geeks on TV, Asian men are not geeks. Well, you know what? We're cutting out a whole bunch of people who actually are geeks, and when we talk about Asian men as being effeminate, and that's something which you hear a lot as a called out stereotype of Asian men. Well, the fact is, are we then embracing a sense of homophobia because there's a fear that somebody's masculinity may be displaced in a direction that's not the traditional masculinity that we see in society? Again, part of the conversation. I think we probably have room for one more question, and then we're going to take a break for lunch. You guys can go off campus. There will also be Parks Barbecue, great Filipino barbecue. It's going to be here with lunch boxes on sale in the lobby area here, and then we'll pick up again in, let's see, what time is it?
2 o'clock.
At 2 o'clock. Probably give a little 5 minutes extra because we're running.
So here's the last question. It's up here in the middle.
Hi, this is a question for Keni. So in your professional opinion, for Asian women being depicted as temptresses, schoolgirls, and submissive, is this because, in your professional opinion, because there's such a high demand for it, or is it because there's the assumption, or is it both?
That's a great question. I feel like the stereotypes around Asian women in porn are perpetuated by the porn industry, and what you have with Asian female performers a lot of the time is when they're coming into the business and wanting to succeed, and those are the only job opportunities that are being offered to them, they have a choice of whether they're going to do it or not. And a lot of the time, they don't. They don't have their own personal integrity to how they're presenting themselves on camera, whether they're having sex or they're reading the news or whatever they're doing. It's like you got to have your own personal integrity to how you're going to portray yourself. The industry treats it very much like if it's not going to be you, it's going to be the next one. So they take the paycheck. And I understand that I understand the perspective. If that's all you're offered, then that's all you can take. But if you come out of the stereotypes, it's like you can't make money in the porn business unless you do unless you go into the stereotypes with a positive sorry, I'm losing my. You can't make money in this business unless you adhere to what you're being booked for. Like they book me because I'm an Asian guy, right? In the States, they don't book me for all of the let's say
generic roles.
Right, but that's because I choose not to do them. Like they did a parody of Return of the Geeks, and they didn't give me the script until like the day before, and I was booked for it, and I went along to it, and literally as soon as I got the script, I walked off set because I was like, I'm not gonna do that. All of the jokes were around the age. I was the butt of all the jokes, and even though I found them pretty funny, I had a responsibility to how I'm going to portray myself as an Asian man, not just as Keni. So I made the decision personally with my own integrity, but there's a lot more Asian women out there who aren't self-respecting themselves and taking care of how they portray themselves as an Asian woman.
It's a tough industry. I mean, I think that what you said about, if it's not you, it'll be the next person. A lot of people come through the industry without, obviously, the ability to, you come from very, very bad backgrounds and rough circumstances.
The conversation around race, for a lot of people, comes secondary. I was even speaking to Heli before, is like, a lot of the conversation that I have is more about sex-positive attitudes. It's about breaking down the walls of, oh my God, there's a tit or a ass or or they're having sex, and so the ethnic part of it, the ethnic and interracial part of it doesn't really come up a lot. But when you look at it, there's so much of that's been paid attention to, and not a lot of positive aspects being paid attention to. So everybody always wants to talk about how bad they're being portrayed or disrespected, or how women are being exploited in porn, when all I ever see are confident, sexually confident, sexually expressed women everywhere I go on set. Every set I go to, the girls, they know what they're doing. They know they're making great money, and they know that this is just sex. It's not like it's not like something to be ashamed of. So, and I'm sure every Asian guy here knows Bruce Lee's famous quote of honestly expressing yourself being, he said, my friend, that's a very difficult thing to do. But in porn, there's no hiding. You gotta do what you gotta do. And I feel the conversation about expressing yourself honestly and not having outside opinion shape your own opinion of yourself is much more important, because once you have that, then the interracial conversation, it doesn't really apply.
You get offered a lot of roles?
Yeah. I get offered probably more than I take, and that, I guess, is a true indication of how much stereotyping is out there, trying to negatively portray the Asian man.
I was at SAG a couple years ago, and there was this old Asian actor. He wasn't the guy who played Hop Sing in he was one of the very old ones. He always played the Chinese cook. And I remember Sandra Oh was there, and a lot of young, happening Asian American actors and actresses. And he said, back then, they said, well, why did you take those roles? And he said, they were the only roles out there. If it had not been for him taking those roles, people like Sandra Oh would not have gotten these roles. It was a journey. And so he was at the beginning of the journey, and so he had no apologies for it, and I totally respected that because he was the foundation. Unfortunately, but he saw it as being acting as opposed to, and he did it with a lot of integrity, whether it was a Chinese cook or what have you. And just to give a little props to my husband, he's a producer, and he does a show called America's Next Top Model, and he always believes that women of color are sexy. And he and Tyra have always, and if you see the show, the cast members out of 15, half of them are people of color. And this season they're incorporating men. And he wanted so badly for an Asian man to be there. But
Who's your husband?
Ken. He was on Ken was my hubby.
Just
But-
so they know who he is.
yeah,
I mean, I know who he is.
he's the creator with Tyra Banks of Top Model, and he's done amazing things for the image of women of color, and he fights the network all the time. They always want, out of 15, they always want 11 white women, and they absolutely say no. There's no show if we don't racially mix it up. We want to change the perspective of American society, and the show's international now, of what is considered beautiful and sexy and intelligent. Well, they're not always that intelligent on the show.
All right.
What is considered sexy? It's women who are black, who are Asian, who are Latino, and so I really respect him for that. Everything he does and everything that I do, we always mix it up. Whether it's received positively or negatively, we try to mix it up. And I got the player pin because I play life. Whether it's challenging, I'm never afraid to put myself in a situation that is going to make me grow.
Well, with that, thank you guys so much for joining us and being all out there. Thank you guys for listening, engaging, talking, thinking. So, a couple things. One is, we are going to take a break now. Feel free to go out of the museum, come back, even go across